I want to give you a number, not a temperature, not a parts per million, not a carbon credit. Changing hands in Geneva while a forest burns in a country that did not start the fire. 3.8 billion. That is how long life has been running this planet. Rewriting its air, reconfiguring its oceans, eating extinctions for breakfast and returning. Always returning. As something stranger, more intricate, more alive than what came before. Against that number, place another. 150. That is the window through which one species is trying to see the whole.
This graph plots atmospheric carbon dioxide over the last 150 years. The pre-industrial level of 280 parts per million appears as a perfectly stable floor before the recent spike, a baseline modern policy treats as Earth's permanent thermostat. Because this narrative treats the planet as a mechanical room, the proposed solutions are equally mechanical. Fixing the planet is reduced to a management problem, tracking visible forests and engineering global financial systems to account for the carbon they hold. This led to the creation of carbon offset markets. In this system, massive land acquisitions in the Global South are framed as ecological salvation, turning sovereign territory into a tool for corporate emissions math. When we treat the Earth as a predictable, linear machine, nature becomes a financial commodity. This shifts the focus from ecology to economy, determining which nations are allowed to develop and who gets to set the price for that growth. This bureaucratic architecture is taking shape in places like the European Parliament. The European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism was designed to prevent so-called carbon leakage by taxing goods based on their carbon footprint. In practice, these benchmarks penalize developing industries. For the secondary steel sector in India, lacking capital for complex European verification systems, CBAM translates into punitive certificate costs that can effectively exclude them from the market. Simultaneously, foreign entities are negotiating massive land concessions in Africa to generate carbon credits. These deals often bypass local sovereignty and displace indigenous communities like the Maasai to create green offsets for fossil fuel corporations. This entire geopolitical and financial architecture leans on the authority of the scientific consensus, yet it manages to bracket the messy geological and biological realities of the actual planet to keep the focus on accounting. This framework functions as green protectionism. It maintains historical global power dynamics under the guise of climate justice, while the actual goal of stabilizing the climate is effectively outsourced to the Global South. To see the actual planet, we have to look past the 150-year baseline. Over the last 4.5 billion years, extreme volatility and nonlinear chaos have been Earth's true operating system. Long before humans, large igneous provinces were the planet's original atmospheric engineers. These continental-scale volcanic episodes were massive enough to cause biological resets, with stacked rock layers recording eruptions that lasted for millions of years. Approximately 252 million years ago, the Siberian traps released an estimated 30,000 gigatons of CO2. This triggered the greatest mass extinction in history, eliminating 96% of marine species through ocean acidification and global warming. However, high carbon levels aren't an automatic death sentence. During the Cambrian radiation, atmospheric CO2 reached 7,000 parts per million, where complex animal life exploded in diversity. When you compare that history to our current baseline, you see how small our frame of reference is. Our microscopic 280 part per million window is a geological accident, not a permanent law of nature. Volcanic activity also demonstrates the climate's inherent dualities. Sulfur dioxide from an eruption creates stratospheric aerosols that immediately cool the planet, while the concurrent release of CO2 builds up to drive long-term warming. Geological history proves that the climate responds to shocks nonlinearly. This makes it impossible to capture the planet's future using the simple, deterministic warming equations found in modern policy models. While human treaties dominate the headlines, microbes and fungi are the actual governors of Earth's chemistry. They have been managing the planet's carbon and nitrogen cycles for billions of years. Underground, complex mycorrhizal networks connect 90% of terrestrial plants. This web acts as a massive structural sink, safely sequestering roughly 1/3 of global fossil fuel emissions every year into the deep soil. In the oceans, phytoplankton produce half of the Earth's oxygen. They also release specific sulfur compounds that seed cloud formation and help stabilize the planet's reflectivity, acting as a biological regulator of the global temperature. This chaotic and interdependent biological network is what keeps the Earth habitable. But because these microscopic systems can't be easily monetized or traded, they are essentially invisible at global climate summits. We are attempting to manage a 3-billion-year-old biological network using short-term financial instruments. It is a fundamental mismatch between how humans think and how the planet actually works. This reflects the Jayashankar principle, the observation that powerful nations often define their own problems as universal crises, while the problems of the rest of the world remain localized. We see this in how we selectively choose which species and ecosystems are worth saving. Reducing the biosphere to a single carbon metric allows the global north to maintain its economic security. Meanwhile, the global south is forced to absorb the costs of the transition, often through the destructive extraction of minerals required for green technology. The current framework of international climate governance is structurally designed to protect northern wealth. It functions as a moral imperative that happens to align perfectly with historical economic advantages. Challenging this power structure isn't the same as rejecting the physics of warming. We can accept the radiative forcing properties of CO2 while simultaneously rejecting the regressive policies built around them. This requires what is known as epistemic decolonization, stripping colonial economic frameworks out of our science. We must stop treating the biological capital of the global south as a financial sink for northern emissions and start recognizing it as sovereign territory. We have to move past the idea that the Earth is an optimizable, air-conditioned room. To survive, we have to acknowledge our non-human co-evolutionary partners, like the insects and microbes that actually make habitability possible. Survival requires radical humility in the face of ancient, chaotic forces. Until we acknowledge the planet's true complexity, our climate summits will remain just one species talking to itself, for itself.
96% of marine species erased. Not by a factory, not by a flight path, by the planet, doing what planets do, reordering itself without asking permission. And 65,000 kilometers of ocean floor are doing it. Right now. Quietly. Continuously unmeasured. And none of it is on the agenda.